Test, 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 test. Unmute.
Morning, Kendra.
Morning, how are you? I'm freezing.
Yeah, I know it. Different shoes to wear now. Yes, I took mine. I just didn't do anything yet with it. Oh, I better sign
I'd
this.
shake things up by sitting over here today.
Everybody organized.
Guess I could have sat over there, huh? Gretchen's got to open.
Do I want to mute again?
Nobody wants to sit next to the chair. It's okay. I did put perfume on this morning. Good morning and welcome to the CMH Board of Directors meeting. It is Friday, October 25th. And we'll start off with an invocation from Commissioner Kendra Wenzel.
Good morning, Father. I thank you for this day and for the ability for each of us to be here today. I pray that this board will represent you with honor, integrity, and dignity. I pray that we will show courageous leadership in each of our roles today and that we will follow your lead in any decisions we make. Please bless the work of our hands and be with everyone as they go about their day to day. I thank you and I praise you. In Jesus' name, amen.
The CMHOC mission and vision statement. The mission statement is Community Mental Health of Ottawa County partners with people with mental illness, intellectual and developmental disabilities, and substance use disorders, and the broader community to improve lives and to be a premier mental health agency in Michigan. Our vision statement, Community Mental Health of Ottawa County strives to enhance quality of life for all residents. Next up on the agenda is public comment. If you have a public comment, please come forward to the podium, state your name and where you vote. You have 3 minutes.
Good morning, Barbara Lee Van Horsen from the City of Grand Haven and the Momentum Center. I'm here today with an invitation next Tuesday.
Oh, can I pause you, Barbara? I'm sorry. For whatever reason, it's not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Try it again.
Now, okay.
You can get as close as you can to
There's
that
no-
mic.
It's weird.
It's not-
It's not-
You can hear? Okay.
not working
It doesn't
right.
resonate back here. That's fine. I can hear you though. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. I know you can. Yeah, yeah.
Momentum Center and the City of Grand Haven, and I'm here with an invitation. Next Tuesday, October 29th from 5 to 7, we're having an open house. It's a by invitation open house to celebrate our raising $2 million in our capital campaign and the completed renovation of the former Rendezvous Restaurant into the new Momentum Center. And all of the ways in which we're going to be able to enhance the services that we offer to this community, given this new facility. So we've invited everybody who donated to that campaign, but I also want to extend the invitation to all of you. I brought some cards, so I will leave those. And I hope you can join us because, as I am used to saying, if we all work together, we will keep building momentum.
Wonderful. Thank you. Are there any other public comments? Rosalie.
The Health Endowment Fund grant ended and it was for IDD health and wellness, and like consumers weren't notified that it ended, and a few had Planet Fitness membership, so Planet Fitness sent them an email to let them know that it's done. So I'm wondering, will there be any kind of report on the outcomes, how many participated, how well, what were the benefits of it? And is there still a health endowment fund grant for now to access? And then I went to the Mocha Smart Home opening in Kentwood, and there's a lot of amazing technology that would be beneficial for most people. And it's more for mild, less human assistance, but it's pretty interesting, and Dr. Brashear said that maybe MOCA could come and present to us.
Thank you. And it sounds like you used your proper channels there too. Quick action.
Oh, yeah.
Going through Dr. Bashir's.
I have a Rosalie hotline.
That's a good hotline to be. All right, next on the agenda are consent items. And the motion is to approve the consent items, the following: agenda for October 25th, 2024 CMH Board of Directors meeting. And then also meeting minutes for September 30th, 2024 CMH Board of Directors meeting. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Support. All right, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. The motion passes. Next on the agenda is the Executive Director's Report by Dr. Michael Brashears.
Good morning. Can people hear me? Okay. So it's been sent to you this morning and we'll show it on the screen. And so there are tons of state issues that I need to put together, and I'm going to defer a conversation about those until next board meeting. Several things have happened at the state level in terms of new tools being implemented and not going well statewide. I'll give you an example. We were asked to implement a new tool called the CMHOC, and that is a kind of like level of care determination tool for family services, for children's services. We've been using another tool for the last, 20 years called the CAFIS. And what these tools do is they help us assess the needs of the individual and then determine the appropriate level of care and services that they're eligible for. So the CMHOC was initially supposed to start on the 1st of October, a new fiscal year. But what had happened at the state level is they actually didn't get final approval by CMS at the federal level to change tools. So everybody in the state got rid of the CAFIS, the contracts with it, because it's a company, and I'll tell you what we did, and started using the CMHOC, but then we were told we have to use both tools until further notice, until CMS approves the waiver with the new tools in it. Now, Anna Bignaric, our deputy, and our staff there saw this coming a mile away. So what we did, and I want to thank the staff for this, is we kept our contract with CAFIS open anyway. So we were one of the only CMHs in the state that had the ability to use both tools because everybody gave up their contract with the previous vendor and were scrambling to get it. And the purveyors of that contract are like, oh, you still love us, huh? We'll see. But luckily, in Ottawa County, with Katie Clausen and the team, we decided to keep our contract with CAFIS just in case this would happen. And it did. So I'm glad that we got that right. There are a myriad of these examples happening at the state level, and I'm going to give what I'm calling the State of the State report next board meeting. I was able to attend the Board Association conference with Deputy Director and some of the key staff. Amy was there, Katie Clausen was there, and we got an update from the state on various issues related to CCBHC and various other funding streams. I'm going to put together and give you a report on next board meeting. So I know I said I was going to defer to next month on state issues, but just a comprehensive listing of what's going on, because I want to give what I'm calling the State of the State report and how it impacts Ottawa County and the region. And that's going to take me a little bit more time based on recent actions. In terms of the regional entity, Dave Parnham sits on that committee now, and thank you, Dave and others that are on it. We're still in contract negotiations with the contract between us and the PHP. It's been extended like 11 times. We haven't had an actual contract, real contract for decades. And it just keeps getting kicked down the road, amendment keep going, because the core parties, the core CMHs don't agree on certain language related to risk, meaning who has the financial burden if we overspend our budget? Is it just us alone, or does the region play a part of that and the state? And the answer is yes, it's a shared risk model. And we're still in disagreement with some of the CMHs. I will tell you that I've reviewed the contract that's been proposed. I've given it to corporate counsel, Lene, who's looked at it. I find nothing in it whatsoever that would prevent us as a board of approving it. I sent an email to the regional entity this morning saying, regardless of where we are in negotiations, we want a clean contract, their final position in all these issues, so that I can bring it to this board for approval. I am not going to keep kicking the can down the road with amendments to a contract just so the state won't even let us do that indefinitely anyway. So I'm just letting the board know is that at the last regional entity meeting, which was it this week? All my days are mixed up now. Yeah, this week. They voted to continue the current contract for 45 more days. I'm pushing for the contract to be sent to me so that I can have you approve it with corporate counsel approval. We want to be a CMH that's in full support of the regional entity. At the last regional entity board meeting, I did public comment where I called for a call of unity within the region. I pointed out the strengths of each of the CMH directors, excluding myself, because that would be interesting, and the strength of the LRE, or the regional entity's leadership, and how the citizens within the region deserve a contract and deserve a provision of services to be done in a uniform, high-quality, network of excellence manner. I called for us as a region to come together to find what a network of excellence looks like. Let's roll up our sleeves. Let's get in a room until we come out of it, because that is over 80-something% of our budget, close to 90% of our budget here at Ottawa County. And the citizens of Ottawa County should expect and deserve strong leadership and coordination at the regional level, or that system shouldn't exist. So I made those calls in public comment, and I will be working with the regional entity director, Mary Dumas, who I feel is very competent and willing to do the job. And we will be defining what that means as a network of excellence, how it impacts this particular county, and what we can expect moving forward. Right now, we don't have a contract. There's a lot of division. One of our partners has a $20 million deficit. They have no idea how they're going to solve it without other revenue, and we cannot let that impact us. Excuse me. I'm even choking on the notion of it, right? I won't let this deficit at the region interfere with the service delivery of our services in Ottawa. So that's kind of like where it is on the region right now. I'm approaching my 90th day as permanent executive director. I was made permanent in July. And I have some 90-day key findings that I'd like to share. This is not a comprehensive list of things that we need to improve on. It's a very targeted list based on my observation and getting to know the organization more over the last 90 days. As an interim, I did an initial analysis, as you know. It gave items kind of globally on what we need to improve on as a CMH. Lack of space, caseload size, stabilizing the residential budget were some of those key findings. And we also found in that initial review that the trust between the CMH staff and the board's improving is what we got. And they feel better about things on that level during that evaluation, if you remember. This time I'm looking at opportunities to strengthen or develop, and this is not an exhaustive list. One of the things that we need to do, and by the way, all employees were sent this report this morning, is look at the roles and responsibilities between leadership and our programs. Who does what when in several key areas. Contract compliance and oversight, provider relations. Who is the primary relationship with the provider, right? Operational guideline development and implementation. We have a basic foundation. We need to strengthen it. look at all of our operational guidelines within Ottawa CMH and say, are they 2024 relevant? Or are they just kind of kicked down, do they reflect the true processes we need? Quality and performance improvement is an area that is atrophied due to staffing issues over the last couple of years in terms of oversight, planning, development. Outcome measurement. We need a new series of dashboards and outcome measures that let the public, the board, and our staff know how we're doing in at least 10 areas of performance, which I'll outline at a future date. But we need outcome and performance indicator dashboard development. The way that we look at budget reporting, oversight, and management, I was joking right before the meeting because we had two of our board members that were doing an ad hoc finance committee with Amy, our finance director, to understand how to read the financials, what it means. And we're in discussion on that level of how we can get this data and make it more user-friendly and inform the board and our community what's truly happening. The other part of budget reporting and oversight is what is the roles and responsibilities of program supervisors, other management staff, in overseeing and monitoring the budget. And the basic expectations of who does what, we need to strengthen that area, become clear on it, and so that it reflects kind of an excellence model in business administration. We have to really overhaul our utilization management program. How do we determine the amount, scope, and duration of services? How does a family know how much CLS they really are eligible for? How do people know, in general, how many outpatient sessions does it usually take to show improvement with certain conditions? I have staff that are ready and willing to take a formal look, an extensive overhaul of our utilization management program. I've asked the deputy director to do a 30-day eval, which she's already started, on where are we performing certain aspects of utilization management now in our organization, and how do we need to consolidate and strengthen it. It is clear that in this area is directly linked to budget and budget performance and quality of service. So a retooling of utilization management needs to happen. We need to strengthen it. The whole appeals and grievance system we're putting in a new electronic medical record that you approved last month called PCE. We call it the Savior because we're hoping that it helps us with a lot of different things. And one of them is tracking customer service complaints, appeals, rights complaints, getting aggregate data that can be reported at our rights committee in a different way and to you ongoing. Whether the types of complaints, how many people have been denied services and for what reasons, and does that make sense, and how do we have oversight on it? So the whole appeals and grievance process has to be strengthened. So those areas, I'm not to say are non-existent, but they need a comprehensive strengthening examination of those key areas. And when you look at it, you're like, that's a lot of the general operations of things. And the answer is yes, it is. There are also some areas of analysis that we have to do pretty quickly. One is that we have to look at our CLS expenditures, management, and rate setting process. Our CLS kind of rates and how we authorize it are kind of all over the map, and we need to strengthen that pretty quickly. You primarily use person-centered planning to determine what somebody needs, but you also have to have a philosophy on how we're setting the rates. And our rate setting process for community living supports is all over the map. So we have to strengthen that and do an analysis immediately. We continue to look at our specialized residential expenditures and rate setting. I will let you know that in addition to us looking at it, our various CMH partners in the region are also looking at it, and the region's also looking at it, so we can get to uniformity and residential rate setting across the region. So what started here is now spreading to the region, which is good. We have to look at respite service expenditures management and rate setting. That's another area I want to look at. How are we authorizing level respite? You know that respite doesn't just belong to the IDD programs. Respite should be available, and it is, to all of the population groups. Are we doing that? Do we actually have utilization of respite beyond folks with autism and IDD? Do people that are dealing with children, seriously emotionally disturbed population of children, yes, they have respite. Is this thing coordinated? Is this thing set up where we're truly meeting the needs of the families that require the respite? So we'll be looking at that as well. It's not broken, needs to be strengthened. Supportive employment, that's supposed to be available for all populations we serve, except for children under 18. That's done through the school and MRS and other things. But are we doing supportive employment on the mental health side? How much are we promoting it? Who's in work? Who could get a job coach? Is it primarily only happening in the DD, IDD side? How much of it's happening? What's our goals for it? Is it a foundational philosophy for us to ensure that anybody that wants to work can? So we need to look at it and look at how we're setting the rates and the contracts to do that, job coaching and things like that. And what I'm noticing internally is that we have certain things that belong to the all population groups being managed by one population group. So like you take something like CLS or actually respite would be a good example. It's really managed within the IDD adult division for the entire organization. Does that make sense? Or do you centralize it? So we have to look at not only what we're doing, how we're doing, and what makes sense now. So the identified areas for strengthening demonstrate a need for us to rebuild and reorganize all of the key functions related to managed care and administrative excellence. We've already begun many things to address these issues, and I'll be providing a comprehensive action plan to the board by December on those areas, what we intend to do. The idea here, board, is not to think it's broken, because it's not. It needs strengthening, and we want to become a center of excellence in these areas. This is not to say that the previous administration and the before me didn't do any of these things. I want to be very clear. I have a different vision on how to strengthen it and what we need so that we turn into a center of excellence in this area. This doesn't provide a comprehensive list of everything we need to do. This doesn't look at how we deliver clinical services and things like that. This is really at the managed care, administrative oversight portion of it. And I'll tell you, when you're strengthening, it's so much better to do it from a point of a foundation that's not broken. And we'll be able to actually move towards different efficiencies. But there's not one key area that I'm saying, oh my goodness, red alert, we're out of compliance. We are in full compliance in all these areas. We just need to strengthen them. I'll entertain any questions on my director's report.
Mr. Byrd.
Michael, with regard to the regional contract, I have to admit that I could be totally wrong on this, but as I was first studying for my recent assignment to this board, I went back and looked at a number of things, including the Medicaid Providers Manual, and I looked at a copy of what I thought was the existing contract with the region. And something that struck me as a red flag was there was a statement that nothing in this agreement in any way recognizes an entitlement to services. And I thought, well, that's a fundamental difference than any other premise that we've worked on in the past. My understanding is the Medicaid Providers Manual is a list of allowable services that a person is entitled to as a Medicaid beneficiary. And I would hope the regional entity recognizes that. But as you're going through your final audit of this contract, if that's something that could be codified and clarified, that's a critical principle of our service delivery system. If we're saying someone who is Medicaid eligible is not entitled to services, that's a tremendous shift in focus.
Yeah, that was actually discussed, that very topic, in the work session that the region entity had. We had Robert Sheehan from the board, CMH Board Association come and go through kind of different models throughout the system. I think what's key is, and I think we can get that clarified in the contract, while there's an entitlement for Medicaid services, you still have to meet medical necessity criteria to obtain them. So sometimes when people hear entitlement, they go, look, it's on the list. I definitely should get that. I want that. I want that. I want that. Well, only if you meet the medical necessity criteria for it. And that's why we have to strengthen our utilization management kind of view so that people understand just because you have a benefit that you're entitled to, the amount, scope, and duration of it, or the benefit itself, because it's Medicaid, you have to meet medical necessity criteria for. And then that criteria basically demonstrates that you have a need for the service. Okay? So I think we could strengthen the language, Tom, related to entitlement at the PHP at the regional level to say, you have an entitlement in addition to also needing to meet medical necessity criteria. Because some examples come in, and some people come in and say, oh, I'm entitled to say CLS, and I want 80 hours a week. Okay, well, how do we, if we give you 80 hours a week, how do we not give everybody 8 hours? You know, so you have to use a different criteria of how much do you need, how much is medically necessary. So I think that's an excellent point for us to combine medical necessity language with entitlement language at the regional level, because we have to implement that here. And so we'll have notes on this, and I'll make sure that that's brought up at the next regional entity contract meeting, which will be next week.
Thank you.
Other questions?
I actually, so, and getting back to, I think we can kind of connect all of these things when you talk about medical necessity. So the Michicans or the CATHA system that you're talking about is like an acuity system, is that correct?
Yeah, it is. The Michicans was originally just the cans. And the primary purpose of that tool, believe it or not, was to help determine what should be the focus of treatment on a various categories and domains. And there was a numerical score, 3, meaning red alert, do that, need to focus on this part in treatment. What the state has done is work with the purveyor of that tool to also turn it into a way of determining which program would link to how you score on this tool. And since it was never designed that way, there's been a lot of crosswalks and things in thinking of it. Dr. Lyons is the expert that developed the cans. He's at the University of Kentucky. When I was here previously with a contract with Darren Lubers, we work with Dr. Lyons all the time on the ANSA and the cans, which is part of that. And we actually were part of a study to use it in a CMH setting for one of the first times. So I'm familiar with the tool. Just the way the state's using it was never designed to say your score here means get these services. So they've had to redo the tool. But yes, in short, it does. That's my long-winded answer. Say yes, you're correct. But just to get more education on it.
Sure.
Nothing replaces family-centered planning, though, in person-centered planning. No tool that we have can supplant data that you get from families with kids and what the needs are and how much of it, right, and adults. So it augments it.
It's the assessment piece. You still
Yeah.
have the assessment before, and it's part of the tool.
Correct.
Used. And so it would determine what you're entitled to or not, or help determine what you're entitled to as far as services are concerned, point in the right direction.
Correct.
So.
And one always
that's
has appeal rights if the tool's wrong.
wrong. Well, and hopefully the subjective and
Yep.
objective data that's collected during the assessment period, would be helpful as well. So you have an advocate on the other side. So how long, can you give a history, Dr. Brashears, of your work with the PHP, just in brief, so people realize kind of your background and why you're
Sure.
kind of come in and dig in as quickly as you
Right,
have
so
been?
you have to go way back. I'll try to do this uncharacteristically in 3 minutes or less.
Okay.
I will have my brain do
I
that.
just think it's really relevant to the discussion
Yes,
today.
so
knowing your
Dave,
background.
put me on the
Dave-
clock.
Dave will be with
Okay.
you.
So I was actually part in 2000 of the initial way the system pulled out the PHP system. And that's basically a system that manages the Medicaid for a group of CMHs. I was on the ground level when I worked in Lansing on that, in the first iteration of PHPs and what they're supposed to do on the role between a CMH and the kind of regional Medicaid managed care organization. When I was director last, I was on the founding committee of the Lakeshore Regional Entity, helped write some of the bylaws, help inform the process, and we kind of screwed it up, just to be honest with you. When we wrote it, we made it too much. It wasn't, the managed care organization at the PHP level wasn't strong enough to manage. We kind of developed a loose federation kind of model, and it didn't work. The state said, no, we want a strong managed care entity at the top. I'm familiar with all of the roles and functions of PHPs and how it relates to CMHs. On the provider side, I was when I worked for providers, I would frequently attend those meetings and, let's just say, point out areas to strengthen and participate in work groups on several of the PHP functions. And for the public, the PHP is the Lakeshore Regional Entity that manages the Medicaid for a region of CMHs. There's 5 CMHs in our region. Money comes from the state, goes to the PHP, comes to us. So I'm very familiar with the structure, the intent, the purpose of the PHP system. And now I serve obviously on their operations committee as an executive director for our CMH.
Thank you. So number of CMHs that are participating in the our LRA Lakeshore Regional Entity,
There's 5.
5.
So it's Network 180, West Michigan CMH, which has 3 counties, Allegan, which is on point. Who am I missing? Us.
180. Kent.
Oh, yeah, and Health West, which is Muskegon. So Health West, Network 180. Let me just go by their counties because everybody has these names. Like, I'm proud to call ourselves Community Mental Health of Ottawa County. Okay. So On Point, which is Allegan County CMH. Network 180, which is Kent County CMH. West Michigan CMH, which is West Michigan CMH for 3 counties, like together. And Health West, which is Muskegon County CMH. Those are the regional partners that make up the board and the Lakeshore Regional Entity.
So how many years have we gone without a contract being?
I think it's
signed?
2021. I think that's the last one. I think since 2021, we haven't had a fully, but even that contract had several times where we did amendments to it. So really, it's been several years since we've had a kind of new contract. We just kept doing amendments to kick the old version down the road. And really, the main issue is how do you deal with deficits at the CMH level? When we overspend, who really is primarily responsible? And the answer is everybody, as far as I'm concerned. But some CMHs think it should just only be the regional entity, almost like a fee-for-service arrangement. We provide all the services. We tell them how much it costs, and they give us the money. Well, if there's no expectation of managing the money, then we're nothing more than a provider of services. So if we're nothing more than a provider of services, then why can't a provider like Hope Network just do it? Or somebody else just do it? And the answer is, it's very clear in the mental health code, we have to do it. So we're trying to figure out this dynamic of how do you deal with large deficit reduction, how do you deal with a large deficit in any one county? And just remind this group, there was a time when we cut 1/3 of our staff because we were in a Medicaid budget. We took full responsibility of that overage. We managed it. And we didn't ask our partners to pay a dime, even though there was part of the risk they took. So we have personal experience at this CMH of staying within our budget and being accountable for that. And that's what's at stake in this definitional challenge at the regional level. Like, who's responsible?
So would it be fair to say, because of your history with PHP and the LRE, you are uniquely positioned to kind of stop the line, ask for solutions, and get a contract signed?
Unfortunately, yes.
Yeah.
So meaning it's not, it's taking probably 30% of my time in dealing with LRE operational and budgetary issues. So yes, it's something I have the experience in doing and can do. I say unfortunately because I rather be focusing on the needs of the folks right here in a more specific way.
But if you invest your time right now, be it 30%, that's an awful lot. Do you
Mhm.
foresee in the future that it will take
Yeah.
a lot less time and serve
Yeah.
our consumers here? in
I hope
County?
so.
Does the LRE, are they still going into CMHs to do reviews like they used to?
Yes, we're subject to over 100 audits a year.
Yeah,
So yeah,
okay.
they're in full force.
And does that get publicized somehow, the data? Okay. I've
Yes.
not seen anything.
Yeah.
On that.
Well, that's true. Like bringing their audit results here,
Yeah.
we'll definitely can do.
Yeah.
But at the regional entity, they definitely in their board meetings do the findings. But that's true. If we haven't been bringing them here,
Okay,
we should be.
okay.
I really like what you're doing with utilization review too.
Mhm.
Another element that I think will be satisfied with improving or strengthening utilization review is actually consumer satisfaction. 'Cause There's
Correct.
just an increased awareness, and the word gets used a lot with us is transparency, but it's really improving transparency of the system. So thank you very much for your efforts.
Great.
May I ask another question?
Yes, absolutely.
Michael, with regard to management, is it more of an illusion of management? There are only certain elements of our budget that you really can manage. For example, if a consumer comes to us requiring MI services, we have an obligation to deliver them. We can't say, oh, well, we don't have the money to do that, because the Medicaid Providers Manual says we have to provide service. There can be no wait list. We can't deny someone services because we don't have the money. So the only thing you really can control is your G&A expenses. And as we saw from the event several years ago when we were in financial crisis, if we cut a third of our staff, obviously that has to affect services. And I can tell you, I believe services were curtailed as part of that process. And there were consumers who were receiving a certain type of CLS who no longer had it available for a long period of time.
Yeah, we have an obligation to manage, like in your example is a good one. Boy, we better be having more control over certain things. So like, for instance, in your example, we might not be able to control the need of the person asking for the service when we must provide it. But we have to make sure we're ensuring that we're keeping track in the aggregate, all of the needs of folks to see what the impact is and having detailed processes and making sure there's equity. So right now, because if not, we're left in the trap of whoever shows up with the highest needs get 80% of the funding. Yes, so we have to know this data so well that it gives me the foothold to go to the region and the state and say, here are the true needs of Ottawa County residents as of today based on these measures. And the amount of Medicaid we're getting is not sufficient to cover the current utilization. And so as we strengthen utilization management and understanding how we're spending the money, it gives me the ability and the platform to go to the region and to the state and get legislative support, by the way, of funding equity now. All Medicaid should be funded equally in the same formula for each county. There are counties that get twice the amount, sometimes 3 times the amount of Medicaid per person in Ottawa. So Tom, once I get the information, just like we did in the old days with general fund, I got to do it with Medicaid and say, our folks deserve, we deserve higher Medicaid revenue, but you got to prove it first. I can't just say, here's my deficit, I did the best I can. I have to be the top gun on doing that so that it can't just be said, well, you mismanaged the thing you have no control to manage in the first place, and there's no more revenue. Oh, wow. That can't be our stance. We have to collect this information so we can advocate for the revenue that we deserve. We have to prove we need it in a very specific way, or it's just, we tried. We used other funding sources to cover deficits or whatever the thing is. That's not going to be the way we move forward.
brings up another question that I wrote down about rate uniformity.
Mhm.
So we don't currently have rate uniformity for the, no, yeah.
No,
Is that one of, potentially a reason for the $20 million deficit?
could be, for sure. So
It's
rate
that
uniformity, to me,
competition.
it's simple. It's simple. A client or citizen should be able to go to one county versus another in our region and and the providers receive relatively within plus or margin, the same rate of providing that service in that county. So that if you were doing individual budgets for self-determined clients, and they all of a sudden had to move counties, there shouldn't be a huge difference in what providers are paid and what you're authorizing in terms of the rate. It's all related to cost of care. So uniform rate setting really gets us off the schneid of saying, what should the cost of care generally be for this type of service? And what can a system expect? And more importantly, we should have portability of services throughout the state. So a consumer goes somewhere else, they're not going, or a provider goes, wow, I can go over to this county and I could provide residential services at a better rate. And believe me, that's happening right now. You have providers that are saying, I refuse to provide this service in this county at this point, and not necessarily ours, but other counties, because the rates are so different for the same identical service. So rate setting uniformity backs into utilization management, which backs into making sure you have a uniform benefit for everybody and it's funded closely the same. And that's what we need across our region than the state. But it starts in Ottawa, our own internal process of doing that.
I have to say, what I wrote down was you're always solution seeking. And I really like the way you're framing, problems with, we already have the framing, right?
Mhm.
So it was strengthening rather than looking at it and saying, hands up in the air, I just give up. You're seeking solutions and I really do appreciate that in your
Yeah,
role.
I inherited a CMH program on firm foundation, and now we're talking about center of excellence development and strengthening. But I want that message to be clear.
And I'm
that,
not
you
even
know,
talking about our historical past. No, it's just
Great.
kind of what I'm seeing as the chair. So
Thank you.
Any other discussion?
I just have a comment, and that is, I was talking to a parent of an adult with IDD, and they were just commenting how they believe that the work of CMH is the most important work that's done by the county. And I think, I think that's true because it has the potential to so deeply impact the families involved with CMH. So he was very encouraged by what he's seeing happening with CMH and the hard work you're putting in. So I just want to relay that to you.
Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Now moving on to a presentation and the
Good to hear.
recommended millage oversight process by Dr. Michael Brashears.
I'm up again.
You're up
Okay.
again. It's Dr. Brashears' show.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you that this, let me just pull it up on my end too. This presentation was also sent out to all staff this morning. And I can make it available, and we'll make it available for the public on our site as well. Let me get my presentation pulled up on my end, so I'm not just looking at your screen. So what I said I would do is we would look at millage oversight and what the role of the board and executive leadership should be. And I'd come prepared, kind of giving a brief recap of the millage and a recommended way to manage the millage. And that's what I intend to do. I had the honor of doing a kind of like educational series talk about this. I think it was 2 Fridays ago. I forget. They're all blending together. Stephen, you were there. Some of us there. We had the largest turnout of community for that setting, that discussion. And I sent you the slides on that. So some of this is replicating the front end of it. And I will tell you the feedback we got during that educational talk was great. I just want to say how lucky we are as a county to have the millage. And we were the first in the state to get a CMH millage. And without the millage, this organization would be in huge, difficult straits. And I'm going to walk through that why and then why that is, and then the future of it. So I'm going to give you language that was originally done in a presentation way back when it was first done. And it just reminds you and the public why the millage in the first place. Why the millage in the first place was back in 2015, there was a $2 million shortfall in the Medicaid budget. And we were anticipating at that time, $7 million over the next 4 years would be reduced. And that was primarily based on what the state was giving us as a region and what we were receiving from the region. And there was a change in how we calculated that at the regional level. And with the difference between the state, what they were giving the region and us, we were in a $2 million shortfall, which led to the reduction of staff and Tom, I would say the change in the delivery and elimination of certain services, right? So critical programming and services to our most vulnerable citizens was being reduced, and in some cases discontinued. Can Do was no longer here. Some of our day programs closed, and we went to social rec model with millage as a way to help but not replace how we deliver that service. And so it was responding to a perceived and real Medicaid shortfall. And remember, there was no millage back then. There was no CCBHC funding back then. Grants yet hadn't been propped up to kind of work alongside the gap. And we were looking at a dramatic need to deal with service reduction due to anticipated Medicaid loss. The actual ballot language I put on there because I think it's important. Because we're talking history. Why was it here in the first place? What was the original intent? And remember, this is 10 years ago, almost 10 years ago. So I'm just going to read it. I'll skip the first part. I'll get down to, it's 0.3 mils. Yeah, I'll have that finance tell me what that means. For a period of 10 years, 2017 through 2026, inclusive for the purpose of providing a fund to supplement but not supplant Medicaid, not taking millage and saying, here's a Medicaid service, use millage, can't do that. But because we were seeing a reduction and kind of shrinking of the Medicaid benefit, what about all of those other programs that identifies you as a community mental health versus a Medicaid health plan? So the language was very deliberate that it was a fund to provide a fund to supplement, supplement, not supplant, Medicaid funding, Medicaid general fund dollars, and Ottawa General Fund, and to support additional programming and services for Ottawa County residents who are clients of the CMH system. So who's a client? At the time when we wrote it, it could have been specifically defined as anybody we're currently serving. I see that definition more broadly in the community as anybody that might need preventative work, services, different populations. So you can be a client of CMH and not be a Medicaid recipient. That's how I interpreted that when I was going back and looking kind of like a forensic review of what's going on. And that's important because what defines a community mental health should be services and supports around the Medicaid benefit in addition to the Medicaid benefit. If not, just call us, Health Central Medicaid insurance plan and let the health plans just manage us. And there'd be no community programming for different groups and to support the services. So the millage was developed, in my belief, the language to help deal with the funding crisis and to ensure that there are other services for folks that we serve that are not on Medicaid. Does that make sense? Okay. It's important because 10 years later, you're like, what is this fund and how do you get it? Right? So it's about 5% of our revenue, give and take. I didn't vet this number with finance. It's my best guess. It might be, according to Amy, like 4.4 or 6.2. So it's plus or minus. 5%. So you can see it's a small slice, but a very important slice. So we average, because it's based on tax revenue, of getting, this is a rough estimate, between $3.2 and $4 million per year, some of extra millage revenue. Some at the beginning was much smaller, you'll see in a moment, just because we were getting the program started and it was just first coming in. But on average, this is kind of based on the tax rates, how much we'd get in for it. So let's look at the expenditure since 2018. You notice we spent about in this part of it, 14,500,000 of millage dollars. And when you look at 2018, you can see this was just getting started. It hasn't started yet. You know, the revenue's coming in. And you can see that in 2023, we had a highest use, primarily to help stabilize, even though we've been doing it a long time, specialized residential programs. We peaked in terms of the use of millage to help with that. So you can see through the years how much we've kind of spent in one analysis that I did. So why the different amounts every year? Michael, if you get 3.4, spend 3.4. Well, one of the things we were doing is using millage dollars were utilized as the funding source of last resort. That's a little wordy, I need to change that. So if we could charge anything we were doing to state fund, anything we were doing with CCBHC, anything we were doing to Medicaid, because you can't supplant, we might have booked it, the expense originally in millage, and then moved it by the end of the year to the appropriate funding source, which can create a surplus in millage funding, because we had to use it as a way of dealing with funding issues. And we knew we couldn't use it to pay for Medicaid services, but on the books, we might have moved some expenses to our state general fund, because you don't want to ever give state general fund back. That's the primary rule of every CMH. Don't do that ever, because you lose it, okay? And you can only carry over a certain amount. So on the books, millage was originally booked for certain services, and by the end of the year, we might have moved some of that expenditures to general fund, as you should. Why? To protect the millage, right? So it's one of the ways of explaining the variance of expenditures every year. Like this kind of, we're using it as a fund to help stabilize the whole organization and to develop some new things. And if you were at the discussion 2 weeks ago, you would have seen a list of all the programs we funded and some outcomes related to them. And I can come back at a later date and go through that with the full board when it's in a different context of millage, and you'll see why in a moment. But does that make sense why you could have a changing of the amounts? It wasn't just based on what you allocated. It's at the end of the year, Amy has to figure out what's the best funding source to allocate and keep things going. And millage was a way for us to deal with some of that variance of where does the expenditures go for each service. Never Medicaid though, mainly in general fund. So what's changed since 2017? Well, remember, we were thinking there's going to be like a 4-year, $7 million dip in Medicaid. Then COVID hit. COVID hit, and what happened? Medicaid rates started going up because eligibility for Medicaid was relaxed. So we ended up getting more than anticipated Medicaid funding than we were thinking originally when we first got the millage. Remember, millage was first invented to deal with this Medicaid crisis. Then COVID hit and we're like, not as big as a Medicaid crisis. And it actually went up tremendously, our overall level of dollar amount for Medicaid. Our state general fund situation changed. We were 45th. We were like the second worst funded at the state general. Now we're the 10th highest. We've had a movement due to efforts we did originally, and then the way changing how they change general fund allocation to each CMH. In fact, we get more general fund than Muskegon does now, okay? And so that assumption changed, where before, when the millage first came out, we had next to little general fund dollars. We got a very small budget. It's still small, it's around, $4 million, but it's definitely better than it was in terms of overall percentage. What else happened since then? Well, the arrival of the ever elusive CCBHC funding. which gives us extra Medicaid payments and allows you to expand services out to groups even in non-Medicaid and get more revenue. So while the original assumptions and why we needed a millage might have been challenged or changed, the need for millage is still there, which I'm going to show you in a moment. But that's kind of why you had this situation of need the millage, glad we have it, because we didn't have CCBHC funding. We were the second the bottom on state general fund mental health dollars. And we were anticipating a $7 million reduction in Medicaid. And the Medicaid one didn't happen as great. So it's important to know the history and where we're at now. And there was a lot of dialogue at the educational series on that. One of the things I want to bring to your attention is since 2019, we have spent close to $10 million on stabilizing both specialized residential programs and other residential programs with millage dollars. So the millage, a large percent of it went to stabilize the residential system. Not all of it, but a large percentage of it. And as you've heard me say before, we can't keep that trajectory up. We can't keep using millage dollars to stabilize residential programs. We actually have to increase what we pay on the Medicaid side to cover some of those issues. We were stabilizing residential providers for the things that Medicaid doesn't pay for, that they don't get enough revenue or they can't fundraise for: facilities, staffing incentives, way to deal with the food budget, because what they collect from Social Security disability isn't enough anymore to pay for room and board and those things. And so smartly, we used millage to stabilize that. That can't be done long-term because all we're doing is keeping our Medicaid rates that pays for the CLS and personal care services in there so low that we'd have to replicate supplementing the other side with millage more and more and more. Some of our providers really need about a 30% increase in their rates because we've been using millage to supplement their incomes, and we haven't done much on the Medicaid side, which we need to change and do. And so you'll see plans for me to do that in the future. But that is a major factor in how millage was used to stabilize a system that had an unintended consequence of not forcing us to increase what we pay on the Medicaid side for these providers. And so now we have some of the lowest rates in the region on the Medicaid side because we've been supplementing them on the other side of their operations with millage. We needed to do both over the years, increase the Medicaid rates and decrease the amount of millage used to stabilize them. So it's my goal to begin that journey, and it's going to be a tough, painful journey finding the Medicaid to do it, but we have to do it, or this number will increase every year. So how were programs in the past selected? I'm getting there. Requests for proposals were done, requests for assistance, Mayday, based on an annual needs assessment and based on funding gaps. So those were the four how things were selected and what we used it for. And I'll get into that more in a moment. Is the millage still needed? You bet, more than ever. It is the main source of revenue that allows us to maintain community or keep in community mental health. We have to offer a robust offering of services that goes beyond Medicaid. Even though Medicaid funding has increased, it is still not adequate to meet the mental health needs, not mental needs. I did this at 5 a.m, sorry, of the citizens of Ottawa County. There are many areas of need that have not been addressed. Housing for the autistic community or other communities that are not part of our specialized residential program. The development and maintaining of CLS providers, assistance for families and consumers to allow services to continue in their own home or non-residential services, just a few. Others you'll hear later, mental health services for folks that are not on Medicaid or at moderate to help us prepare providers to be a CCBHC provider in the future. We need to offer some millage to stand up outpatient providers for all of our populations for mental health therapy and supports. I'll talk about more of that in a moment. So is it needed? You bet. Without millage, we are nothing more than a Medicaid health plan. Recommended millage fund oversight. Now we get to the part. How do we manage it? It should be managed like every other funding source by the CMH staff and the board. Medicaid, CCBHC, State General Fund, grants, millage. The use of millage should be based on community need and CMH funding shortfall. So one of the appropriate uses of millage is how do we provide a robust series of benefits, Medicaid and non, and use millage to help deal with, not the Medicaid side, the other side of the shortfall. So in general, and I'm about to get specific, we should manage the millage in the same way that we manage every other fund source on this board. But what you'll see with robust ways of getting community inpatient to develop a millage kind of strategic plan. So that's why I've been saying you don't need an independent millage steering committee. I intend to use the board subcommittees and other processes to accomplish the same goal, which the millage steering committee really wanted to do. How are you funding it? How are things picked? You know, and how are you managing it? And is there oversight of it? So if you don't mind, I'll go into specifics of that. So millage oversight by CMH. Well, starts with the staff, starts with me as the primary executive managing the millage fund, just like every other fund that you and the mental health code says I should manage. My CMH leadership group, I have a leadership group, should be a major stakeholder group in looking at millage utilization and data review and developing a very specific CMHOC community needs assessment. We have one. I want to retool it, make sure it's targeting, and make sure it gets out to everybody, not just the providers, but everybody in our community on what potential use or services that they think we need. This is actually a requirement that has to go to the state, to you, and the commissioners. And I want to beef that community needs assessment process up and what we ask folks so it aligns with the actual funding we're authorizing for things. Instead of hearing things like, it's about access to mental health services, which every single history needs assessment, the history of the world says people need better access in it and transportation. Well, you'll find that in the same needs assessment. All right, how should we use millage dollars and ask some specific questions based on domains? So I want to develop a very robust community needs assessment, building on the one that we have now, that can serve the purpose of informing that. We also have a position that we're kind of renaming, which is the Director of Community Programs. It's kind of like a customer service person, and this is Chelsea, basically, who it is. And I want to make sure that they're doing program oversight specifically for all millage programs, provider performance, outcome review, and presentation to both this group, me, and the board. We need to strengthen our overview and monitoring of how the programs that we've already funded with millage. We're not building enough with the success stories. We're not showing enough how good it's been doing over the last several years. We have data of how many people we've served and some satisfaction data, but the community needs to know that every dime of millage went to something that nobody else is offering to in the state. And I think that would make voters in the community proud to have a millage. And so we got to beef that process up, both on my end, internally within the CMH system, and now I'm going to tell you about the board. So how should we do millage oversight by the board? We do need to establish, even though I don't have members for the Finance Committee yet, Program and Planning Subcommittee that serves as the millage steering committee based on our needs assessment and recommendations from the aforementioned processes. So if we have a subcommittee of the board called Program and Planning, it would be the group that looks like at all of strategic planning in a detailed way, program management in a detailed way, new programs that are coming online. It doesn't mean the full board doesn't see it, but there's more specific oversight on that. And those are public meetings, open to public comment and feedback. So the development of the program and planning kind of quality subcommittee is really needed to capture how we're doing with any funding source, but especially for millage fund, and look at the quality metrics of all of them. The subcommittee would approve the annual spending plan of the millage and forward to this board for consideration. So part of our budget program is that you actually approve our spending plan or budget for the next year, and millage would be part of that, and you'd be able to see specifically what that looks like. And then the subcommittee moves it to the full to the full board for approval. So what I'm doing is I'm taking the millage steering committee that was originally created and I'm embedding it in a healthy and consistent board process that includes all of the board members, because you'd show up anyways when we have the steering committee, on it or not, the public and staff all working together. And so I want to build it into the fabric of how we govern here, instead of this separate thing that feels like it's separate. And how do I get the millage? Rosalie asked me that all the time, how do we get the millage, right? So it becomes like, how do you get any other thing in this thing and highlight it so it doesn't feel like it's a thing that is separate from who we are. I'm hoping the millage gets renewed by this community, but I got to do my job and make sure they know the value of it. And then the full board approves the millage, the strategic plan, and budget annually. You also get to review millage outcome results and provider performance measures. So moving the millage steering committee into the fabric of a new board governance model here is the strategy. So how do we get, speaking of, hey, how'd it go? Okay, great. It's on TV. So how do you get community impact? Michael, you just set up a situation where it's board govern and public comment, but how do we do that? Well, our revised community needs assessment will be sent out to all folks. We'll get information there. I also intend to do quarterly updates by me to the public, part of my Friday stuff, on how we're doing with millage, your millage dollar at work, your program outcomes at work, how this makes us unique as a CMH. I think it's important that the folks can come and ask me directly, and it doesn't become a mystery, right? That's the other plan. And then development of a millage outcomes and utilization dashboard. Over the next year, you'll see a series of dashboards that we'll develop. It should be almost like a ticker, like, person served keeps going up, like McDonald's, 1 billion served. Here are the outcomes, and you can see it on our website and other places, key indicators of how the millage is doing with other key indicators on a continuous basis. So it's the community input then is a combination of assessment, face-to-face interactions, and data that's available all of the time in a transparent way. If I do this right, in about a year and a half, no one should ever say, how are we doing on the millage? They may have questions on what the heck did you put out there, but we should really know and feel, empowered to do it. So one of the things that I alluded to is we have unspent millage dollars. I'm putting out an RFP Monday to have providers submit for us proposals for some of the use of unspent millage, right? In the following areas. And by the way, you still get to approve all this. It's not like I'm going to send out the RFP and then say, this is what we're doing. Once we kind of figure it out, we make recommendations, you come, we go through each one of them, and you have to approve them like a contract. So what I want to do, last board meeting, I talked about social rec programs moving, that we didn't really get the word out when we did the last RFP. Very few people, and even my board, didn't even know it went out. And we actually awarded some, and the ones that we had before with some new parameters. So I want to offer another opportunity to the community to do social rec, but on a kind of like daily visit payment model to test that model up. And I talked about that extensively last board meeting, so I won't go back into that again. We have to also expand our mental health treatment and supports to the non-Medicaid population for all age groups and populations, like moderate and some other folks that may not have Medicaid and severe. We have to do this for two reasons. One, we need to develop the provider network outside of CMH's directly operating it, so we can then have them become part of our CCBHC funding stream. So I want to use millage to develop outpatient providers over the next year so that they're set up to then be eligible to get some of our Medicaid funding that we get payments for. But we have to stand them up first. It's not like we can just say, dear outpatient provider network, here are the CCBHC standards, go. They're very complicated. People have to be credentialed in a certain way. You actually have to bill using our system, and our system won't be in place until we put in our new EMR by the end of the year. So I want to extend out with millage mental health capacity to help build CCBHC capacity to do what? Move that stuff off the millage and get it to a funding stream that can pay for folks with moderate conditions or who are not on Medicaid. So it's yes, build the capacity, but then set us up of what's called certified, what are they?
Certified Community Behavioral Health.
No, the provider part though.
Oh, DCO.
DCOs, sorry. Which means provider, right? We're not set up yet, even though we have the CCBHC. We've used our funding to set up the infrastructure here within CMH to start using the CCBHC funding, but we haven't expanded our CCBHC funding outside of what we do to a large degree at all. And we need to do that, or what? We'll be continuously relying on millage to offer a community mental health benefit. So we didn't have this option when CCBHC was, when the millage was first done. And so now I want to strategically use the millage to set up non-use of the millage within a year for those things. I think it makes sense, and then housing options. You'll see that in RFP, we're going to develop and implement living options for those that do not meet criteria to live in a specialized residential setting. Adults with autism, ID, or MI that still live with parents and guardians who would love to live in their own place with supports that may not be part of a CMH system. Right now, we have a CLS on the Medicaid side system that can help people. I'm talking about other people can help us find apartments in different models of independent living for folks in our community that might not even be severe enough to be in our system, but have moderate or have autism, or as we've had many people say, come to that podium, I'd like to retire someday. My kid's still living at home. They're not eligible for a specialized residential home. You can't build enough Benjamin Hopes to fill them all, which I think is a premier provider. We have a lot of them. So what options are for my kid, my adult, right? So I want to use the millage to find people to help us investigate these things now and develop that and see if there are people that can say, hey, we could maybe do like an independent living situation in an apartment and have somebody that's kind of like an RA at the end of the hall, but they're not doing personal care and CLS, and really help structure some of the supports around independent living. Maybe the use of technology to help people monitor folks outside of Medicaid settings and things like that. I heard from the community loud and clear that we need other options for folks with different abilities that may not even be in your system. That's a community benefit. That's the appropriate use of millage. I want to have an RFP to look at that and start that now. That's millage. That's what makes us great. So we're releasing an RFP. You should see it on the sky, on a blimp in the world. I'm making sure on these areas that everybody on planet Earth knows we're doing it, because last time we didn't do that. This time we're going to do that. And so when you're answering questions, if you're a board member or boy, this RFP came out, it's being released to look at the use of millage to ensure that we have a community mental health benefit for all folks in Ottawa County. And that's the focus of millage, moving things that Medicaid should be paying for away from millage, creating new opportunities and supports in our community for folks that may not be eligible for Medicaid, or in addition to those things. So the RFP, I even have a helicopter. The RFP is being launched on 10/28, Monday. The CMH full board will approve all proposals recommended by the CMH executive director and by then, hopefully, the program planning subcommittee, as if like any contract. New programs, if we do it right, can begin in February of 2025. And that concludes my presentation. Open for any questions. Do you understand the structure of managing the steering, the millage steering, what I did there, because I did three things. I gave you historical journey, what I recommend, and why I'm releasing a new millage. Killed three birds with one stone, or damaged them. We don't like to kill anybody.
Michael, who do you envision being a participant in this program subcommittee? You know, that you're gonna put together?
Oh, the program planning?
Yeah,
It would be 3 to 5 members of this board. It'd be like a traditional board subcommittee
Okay,
and executive leadership.
anybody from the community or?
Not on that particular, because it's an official committee of the board, and we'll just make sure that we have representation from the community that represent this board on it. But there's public comment, and we're going to use the needs assessment and other forums to gather community input. And I'll tell you, Dave, why I ended up there. Because as Chris will tell you, when we're sitting on the millage steering committee, if you're a provider that happened to be lucky enough to be there, they were in this weird position. They're like, do I recommend stuff we do? Or do I have to advocate for everybody else that I don't know? And they had almost like this bizarre dual role. I think we need this, but I really can't say that my organization could
Right.
need that, even though we actually need that.
Right, conflict of interest.
Yeah, and then we also had some of our board members, because they were, just show up. So I had to think of a way to build it into the structure and have a robust way to get input. And making it a subcommittee of the board makes it subject to Open Meetings Act, subject to public comment, and subject to transparency.
Mhm.
Community couldn't just show up at our steering committee. And it's too important. It's the community and community mental health, this funding source.
Right.
Does that help?
Yep.
Other questions? So I wrote down use of quality dashboards before I saw your slides. So I
Yeah.
was really encouraged to see that because I think it helps everybody kind of better understand kind of what expectations are of the team that's behind that. And then also even from a community perspective and board perspective, what we're measuring to, what we should be aware of, and then how we best support you. Key metrics on that dashboard, would that be determined then by the subcommittee, or is that something you want to do internally?
Both.
Both?
So
Okay.
we develop them internally, and just how quickly we can form the subcommittee, eventually go there. But every quality metric ends up going there for review and then to the full board. So, in the past, it was a place where we'd look at our outcomes in a more detailed way. So it didn't have to always be at the full board meeting. Even though my presentations are getting longer and longer, eventually we want the board meetings not to be as long because we're doing a lot more work in different venues.
Do you need, because I know what it takes to like get dashboards initiated, do you need more support?
Yeah,
on the
definitely.
board?
One of the things we're doing is implementing a new EMR, which will help.
Right.
But I'll be bringing a proposal on the support needed to accomplish these tasks in the upcoming board meetings. But yeah, we definitely need more help with it. We have great staff. They're just stretched,
Mhm.
Right.
real thin, and we need
Real
some
project.
content experts and some contractual providers to help us. And we'll be putting that forth pretty soon.
Yeah, because it won't be just the millage that you'll have dashboards
Yes,
for.
it'll be
or the
all across the board. The millage is one funding source with a unique impact to the community, so I want a separate one just for that. Because I want to say, dear Ottawa County, thank you. This is why it's continually needed. Right?
And it helps with the gap management too, as they're identified, and then solutions can be created, but you have the financial support in order to start that process
Yep.
using the millage.
Get some testimonies from people who've benefited from it,
That's right.
you know?
Absolutely. I never thought about, reimbursement. I should have. Driving kind of, it's like, if we don't bill for services because we're using the millage as a
Right.
stopgap,
Right.
speaking of gap, then how does Medicaid or how does the state know what our needs are, our financial needs are?
And as a
So
result,
excellent
our
identification.
our residential rates,
Oh, my goodness. Yeah.
the state doesn't really know the true need of what we need on the Medicaid side
Play.
because we've been augmenting it. Believe me, they'll know real quickly. But the point is, it's had a unanticipated negative impact to
Sure.
our Medicaid rate setting on the residential side and the CLS side, but more on the residential side.
So yeah, they'll know more about what our actual cost of service is.
Correct.
No, I love the idea though too about, looking at the mixed housing options related to the individual's needs as well, doing some actually projecting rather than reacting to, housing needs for our community. So thank you very much. I'm sorry, Mr. Rockman.
Follow up on the Program and Finance Committee. What do you have in mind as far as reporting to the board its recommendations? Is there going to be like a chair is going to make a presentation like you currently do, or will there be a written report that's included in the packet, or be a combination of both?
There'll be minutes, a written report, and formal recommendations that's brought by the chair of that committee, and then I'm allowed to add discussion to it, to the full board. And so it's kind of like how the county structure works. We have a finance committee that gets all at the county level. We get all of the kind of finance stuff vetted there, and then it's brought to the full commission, right? And then even when it's brought to the full commission, you better be on site just to answer some questions, there. But it will be presented, this stuff, by an actual one of you with my assistance, by the chair with formal minutes and formal recommendations.
Any further questions?
I do have a point of
Mr.
order.
Byrd?
At some point, we will get into the process of appointing members to that subcommittee, the same with Finance Subcommittee. I'll make a comment here that according to our board policies, the chairperson with the board approval can appoint all the standing and special committees. So just when we get into that process, we could certainly consider authorizing the board chair to make those appointments.
I'm counting on it,
You don't want to do all the work?
but I just
No,
want to follow
I'm
policy.
teasing. Because I know you will, no.
Yeah.
Oh, great point. So, all right. Next on the agenda is old business. Keys to Happiness Counseling Contract by.
Yeah, it's just
presented Dr. Michael Bershers.
Just an update. We said that we'd bring this back. Last time this was one that was tabled. I'm still working out the details of that contract, and we'll bring it to the board as soon as it's complete. We're working on the vetting process for the individual practitioners who's going to be delivering that service, as we talked about last meeting. So it's just not quite ready yet to bring back for consideration for approval. I anticipate that will happen in November.
Okay. And just in review, this particular counseling contract, that's from kind of an area of need in our county.
Yeah, in
correct?
Coopersville area, Allendale, Coopersville area. Yep. And it's primarily for children and adolescents, but can also expand to adult.
Perfect.
Yep.
All right. And then next is the CMH Board Finance Subcommittee appointments.
Yeah, just an update. I asked and didn't get any real help with members of that subcommittee. So what I'd like to do is table the slate based on what Mr. Byrd has said and meet with the chair and figure out how we want to proceed in the development of the finance subcommittee. And then address it next month.
We can do that. We've actually had a little bit of discussion, but
Yeah.
certainly nothing that was conclusive.
Yeah, and you'll see when we get to contracts, we're getting better of articulating some information, but that doesn't replace the need for the finance committee. Right, so if you're all hoping that, hey, we just get this process right and we won't need it, don't even think that. It's a fundamental piece of how I want to manage our financials in the future. So it's just figuring out who can be on it, and if not, I'll have to have people just be told they're on it, I guess. We did have some interest from some
Voluntold.
folks saying, I'll be on it, but not the chair. So, that seems to be the barrier. Yeah, right. So maybe Robin, you can be on it.
Robin will be the chair. Yeah. All right, we'll get to work on that. So next up is new business, and for presentation or information only for the fiscal year 2024 August LRE FSR attachment of Amy Bobble Mast.
that gets presented as part of our final financial status reporting that we do. I'm not sure when we'll do it this year, but usually
Right.
it goes to the state by the end of February. So either
Okay.
January, February, depending on where we're at in the process with our audit. So this is through August, so period 11 of the fiscal year. You'll see that our actuals, our expenses are a little over the distributed revenues. We're so 3.5% under for reporting purposes. We're still, if you look at our spending plan, we're still right on track with our spending plan. What happens in the cost settlement process is we kind of reconcile with the LRE between our spending plan, our actual expenses, and what they have projected for revenues. So we're still seeing about a 3.5% gap in that number. All that has to come in, and we have to, do our due diligence for reporting and getting everything in the right funding source, as Dr. Brashears explained. And then we go to the cost settlement process. And, the LRE reviews all of our documentation, and we're paid out at the end. Either we have to pay back any overages that we received in revenues from certain funding, and they would pay us for any revenues and other funding that we were owed. So it's kind of where we're at in the process. We will, you will see in November, we'll be publishing our final budget adjustment. We'll be increasing our revenues to kind of cover this 3% bubble, and also to allow us adding revenue into the general ledger so that we have some working room to move our revenues to cover the expenses where they're hitting. We don't always know line for line, and we have a large general ledger with a lot of different funding types. So we need to kind of inject potential revenue so we have some working room to line everything up. If that makes sense. But any questions?
Mr. Rockman? Now I'm looking at you right.
Where do we start?
There we go.
I'm just hoping you can enhance my understanding. I'm looking at the projection and the proposed spending plan. And one thing that confused me is why is our proposed projected expenses somewhat less than our projected? And don't know why they don't just match up.
Our spending plan is a kind of a static number that we work on. The projection is a monthly projection of where we're actually at. So that's where you see that $600,000 difference. Our projection is a little over our current spending plan expense. So throughout the year, we have the opportunity as a CMH to submit a spending plan. But we have one that we work with, when it's workable, and only adjust when we really start to see trends changing. At the end of the year, we changed in July to adjust some of our CCBHC revenue assessments, and you'll see some of that is, if you look at the projections in the CCBHC dollars, there's still a gap there. But we didn't feel like for the last quarter that we needed to adjust the spending plan again. It kind of throws the region off. And the expectation is that you have a spending plan that you're trying to work within, and you're adjusting monthly by projecting where you think you're going to go. So until it really grows, or you have a significant, expense that pops up, you wouldn't really adjust your spending plan.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Well, I guess a follow-up on that CCBHC, that's the next page. I guess I'm jumping ahead. I guess, help me understand again. Like, I'm looking at the proposed spending plan, and it's exact same numbers for budgeted revenue as expense. but there's a difference between the projection. It's not much different, but, well, it's a million, so I guess that is a big difference between the projected revenue and expenses. So, yeah, how do you go from that discrepancy to being completely in alignment when it comes to the proposed?
The spending plan number comes from an actual count of daily visits that you're proposing to. Projection of your daily visits, because CCBHC is reimbursed by a static number. So the revenues will always match the expense. If we're gonna have 1,000 services and $1, we would recoup, we would project that we're getting $1,000 for $1,000 of expense, that those daily services are a static number. So our projection, or I'm sorry, our spending plan will balance. The projection is where we're actually at with our service activity. So it's based on the dollar, it's really our numbers of CCBHC dollars is that 4.8 million. That way.
It's the only funding source that's fee for service. in a
Well, that's what I
sense.
was thinking. It's more like that.
Yeah. Don't I wish the rest of it was like that?
Oh, my goodness.
Or at least they were all the same.
Right, exactly.
Exactly. Yeah, Mr. Rockman and I were talking this week about how hard it is to actually plan when you have multiple funding sources and you don't know when they're landing. Yeah, so are you able to like fully close in February typically, or do you still have lingering?
So we have to,
billing.
what the timeline is that we can report any encounter adjustments, and what MDHHS uses to cost settle with the PIHP
Okay.
are any encounters reported through the last week of January. So we always use that as our, this is what we're gonna book, this is it, this is, we try to get everything corrected and fixed to get the most revenue for the PIHP, but also, to make sure it's all accurate.
Right.
As far as the cost settlement itself doesn't even happen until May, June, because most CMHs don't have an audit until after they've submitted their final FSR, then they have an auditor come in. But because we follow the county's timeline, we have our audit at the same time, so we could cost settle earlier, but nobody else in the region is ready at that point. So, we shouldn't, by the time the FSR goes to the state, have any adjustments as far as from an accounting perspective. Whereas other CMHs might, because they are audited after.
Interesting. Find it fascinating, the payment models, especially for health delivery. So, yeah, it can be very confusing, but we seem to manage. Any further questions of Amy? All right, next up is a suggested motion to approve the amended renewal of the October 2024 service contracts as presented. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
And is there discussion? Oh, sorry, Amy, I forgot to say thank you. You usually stay up for a second one, so I apologize. Yeah. Thank you. Yes. All right.
So are we on the contracts? Is that where?
We're into contracts, yes.
Wait, you already have a motion on the floor? I'm sorry.
Then we have support. Now we're at discussion. So you can, Dr. Michael Pashers.
Just want to point out some changes in how we presented these from last time and feedback. So in your packet, you'll see one set of contracts that are amendments to or renewals, and then one set that are new. And again, in the finance subcommittee, we'd be going over this in detail, each one, and then it'd be recommended to come up here. So I also want to point out in your packet, we added a couple of different columns in how we're reporting them. We now have the financial risk threshold, which is what's the potential risk if, worst case scenario? What is the actual budgeted amount? and what's the estimated utilization. So you'll see that those columns have kind of been created, some were there originally, and should give you a sense of like the overall risk if this was utilized, at its maximum limits could be up to this amount. Here's what we actually have budgeted if we know that amount. And based on that, what does that get you? What's the utilization? So when you've looked through the package, you might have noticed that, like, oh, there's new columns, because we're listening to what we need to do, and it's a way to help shape understanding the relationship between a threshold and an actual budget and what you intended to use. So that's why Bill and his staff did a great job kind of breaking these out. We also meet now as a group in leadership to go over all of these things with all the different departments in the same room. So I can get a sense of, okay, we have this new contract coming in, it's a renewal. Oh, it's just the language, or it's just this, okay. And all of us are in the room now, making sure we're all on the same page on why these are being presented. And that's really helped a lot. Bill likes it because he doesn't have to receive 7,000 emails of people saying, yeah, looks good, looks good, looks good. But it helps us really control and oversee the contract management system with all the key parties in the same room once a month before they're even eligible to come to you. So there's going to be several looks at these things before they get to you. And they have been, but we're just consolidating it. So the first group are amendments. The first three are amendments to it. And you can kind of, these are existing contracts. We're just either adding to the existing contract or then the next set are renewals. So renewals mean we have to renew it. Amendment means we have an existing contract and we're just tweaking it a little bit, but it might not be expired. Adding something to it, like, oh, there's another house in that company. Oh, they have another person, right? So that's why they're broken up in that first table as amendments and renewals. And since you kind of have a motion on the floor in a discussion, I can answer any questions related to that group because you vote on that group as a whole, and then we move to the new ones.
Yeah, I have a question about three of the contracts, the Genoa and the Vital Core.
Yeah.
And it appears that they're they're basically doing the same thing with the medication-assisted treatment. And I was wondering if these three, with these providers, are they going to be partnering or collaborating to deliver the services for the medication-assisted treatment for the inmates?
Well, they wouldn't be collaborating together because they're different sources. Vital Core, just so you know, is the main provider for all kinds of healthcare services in the jail. So we needed a contract with them to stay in line with some of the count. And if you're a county commissioner, you realize they had a huge increase in their amount that we pay, but they're very well respected and doing a good job. So the Vital one is managing a like situation with the existing pharmaceutical provider in the jail. And of course, the other one, Geneva, is one that we have right on James Street. So we're utilizing them for certain aspects of the medication assistance treatment program in the jail. And these are part of these programs that other counties don't offer. These are part of the millage and kind of some of it's related to other funding sources, a grant that we got to do, that we're one of the few CMHs that have figured out a way to provide Medicaid assistant treatment in the jail through the grant and through the millage, because you're not allowed to use Medicaid for somebody in the jail because they lose their Medicaid as soon as they become in the jail. And so you have people that are on Medicaid receiving all kinds of services, go in the jail, and the Medicaid stops. And through our millage and the grant we have for Medicaid assistant treatment and pharmacology, we can help maintain the medicine they were getting, say they were our clients in the past or somewhere else, and ensure that people in the jail are getting the right Medicaid assistance treatment. And it's one of the few CMH jail collaboratives of this nature in the state. But you're not wrong. There are similar services. One is aligning with the existing overall healthcare provider, physical health, and the other one is more specified for behavioral health through our pharmacy right on James Street. And I know the sheriff really appreciates the jail services that we're providing there. But it's a unique situation, and it's a good reason why the millage needs to stay around and we get some grants until Medicaid is allowed to be used in the jail, which they might pass. There's talk about it.
Their contract.
Oh, I have a follow-up question on the Community Action House.
Yeah.
And I'd reached out to you about the
Yeah.
program description. And when I see, when I think about Community Action House, when I looked at their website, it looked like it was primarily, we're dealing with food, clothing, shelter.
Mhm.
So with what we're using this for, it's not clear to me what they're going to be providing as provision of supplies, referrals, coordination to care. Can you,
Yeah,
flesh that out?
so it primarily pays for a recovery coach, okay? And a recovery coach for substance use disorders and other mental health conditions. People usually go to the Action House for those items, but it's really primarily funding a recovery coach to help walk alongside folks to ensure that they're getting the vital resources and to connect them to us. And we find if we have, and it's paid through, I believe this one is through our, through, PA2, yeah, okay. So it's paid through our liquor tax money, believe it or not, as part of a substance abuse continuum. The LRE manages that too with the county. And, Stephen, it's a vital service to ensure folks with substance use conditions or mental health conditions that may go to a community action house that does provide a robust array of kind of services for individuals that are linked to us, that are linked to substance abuse treatment. And it may help for some of the costs for some of the other materials they have there in that nature. Now, their treatment philosophy says a humanistic approach to corrections. I think that's what you noticed. Think of social work. And it's done in a way where it's saying the humanistic approach to care is really suggesting that each person has an inherent value, that each person, especially with a corrections history, are viewed and treated with the same level of dignity and respect as other folks, right? And it's taking the word humanistic and applying it in a more broad way of comprehensive, but one on placing people at equal value, which is one of the fundamental platforms of humanistic psychology and humanistic philosophy. So they're using that to say the whole person, looking at an array of supports that treats people, say, especially corrections background, with dignity and equality, is their intended use of the word as I understand it.
Is that any different than the word holistic, or is that very similar?
It's very similar. Holistic will say cover a range of needs from mental health to physical health to wellness, where humanistic will also bring it up just one level of viewing the person with the same amount of dignity and respect as anybody else. And when you're talking about people coming out of jail or substance abuse, there's often can be a stigma in that in viewing them. Oh, especially if it's substance abuse. Oh, they're just choosing that. Or, well, if they're coming back from corrections, well, they got what they deserve, right? So it's a way of dealing with stigma with an overall conceptual phrase. It's not meant to say there's a very specific treatment approach used. It's the way they're viewing the person.
One more. On the PT solutions, I was wondering too, who is our target population there? For these,
Yeah.
is it IDD or?
Primarily.
Okay.
It's maintaining our infrastructure for physical therapy for all of our groups. We use both combination of direct care staff and contractual staff for that. This is a renewal of the contract with it. I think there's a rate increase too for that. It's for our PT delivery system for IDD primarily, but it could be available for anybody that has that in the person-centered plan that's authorized through medical necessity through Medicaid.
Mhm.
It's an entitlement with medical necessity.
with the
think I've
question?
exhausted my question.
No, that's good. Anyone else? I was listening to, I'm trying to think of what his background was, a PhD in criminology, who recently stated in this particular podcast that there was an unintended outcome of deinstitutionalization. And we moved our fellow humans from institutions into the criminal justice system. And so this is kind of work that we're doing to correct that,
Correct.
or kind of put a finger in the dike, so to speak. So, all right, so the motion on the table is to approve the amended renewed October 2024 service contracts as presented. We'll do a roll call vote if we could, Amanda.
Yes.
Ms. Spence? It's hard to
Oh.
hear you.
Yeah, did you say my name?
Yes, I'm sorry.
I couldn't hear you. Yep, yes.
Ms. Wenzel? Yes. Mr. Savage?
Yes.
Ms. Van Hoven?
Yes.
Mr. Byrd?
Yes.
Mr. Kleingens?
Yes.
Ms. Wick?
Yes.
Mr. Rockman?
Yes.
Mr. Parnon?
Yes.
Ms. Cosby?
Motion passes. Moving on to the October 2024 new service contracts. That's attachment C. I read it this time. Suggested motion is to approve the new October 2024 service contracts as presented. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Discussion, and Dr. Michael Bashir.
Yeah, we have a series of 4 contracts. You can see the categories that we added in columns. Just to highlight a couple of these. The first one is to provide a very specific evidence-based practice, dialectic behavior therapy, in a very specific program for folks with intense kind of incidents of self-harm, or have severe personality disorders, or have a high level of suicidality on a consistent basis. And this is a several-week program that's pretty intensive. It's 2 6-week stays at this program for folks that need that as a way of preventing hospitalization and other types of services. And you can see that we're just starting off to see how well they would do. And we're anticipating maybe using 2 people to try it out for the 6-week program. It is expensive, but far less than or comparable to, just a step below, inpatient hospitalization services. So it's important that we develop our capacity to deal with these types of behaviors and with the highest level of severity with evidence-based practices. And so this is a program that is one that's, I wish we could offer more of these. It's a residential-based intensive program for folks with high level of self-injurious behaviors, personality disorders. It's primarily for folks with severe mental illness. And that's the target kind of population. It isn't a program yet that can accommodate folks with complex IDD needs in this one. So this is mostly an MI substance abuse program. So that's what that first
Where's
one
that
is.
located, you
I think it's in the Lansing area.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's by the institute that's the primary kind of purveyor of DBT in the state.
Yeah.
And Dr. Bashir's?
Mhm.
Just to put this in layman's terms, so is DBT essentially talk therapy?
It is. It's a very structured thought, a form of talk therapy, but it's an evidence-based practice, so it's manualized, and there's a prescriptive way that the approach has to be done and measured. A lot of it is getting the participant or the receiver of the service actively engaged in their own recovery. So there's a lot of workbook work. There's a lot of personal work that the person does engage with it that's documented. So it's a very effective manualized treatment approach to dealing with complex self-injurious and behavioral health needs. And it is an evidence-based practice, which means it has to have several independent research studies by different researchers getting to the same results with it, or it cannot be called an evidence-based practice. And it's gone through tremendous clinical trials. It's had 3 independent research studies that have come up with the same results. And the results are a decrease in self-injurious behavior, a decrease in hospitalization, and an increase in the quality of life.
Any further questions?
The other inpatient contracts, just so you know, those are single source agreements. And Bill and I are going to try like hell just to get contracts with these organizations. So we're not just subjected to a single case agreement. Remember, remind the board, this often happens after the fact of the hospitalization. So somebody gets hospitalized in a hospital we don't have a contract with. It could be here or anywhere else in the state. We pretty much agree to a single case rate. Like we're authorizing the treatment. We're going to agree to pay this rate. And if we end up having longer term contracts based on expected utilization, we can usually bring that rate down, the daily rate, say from 1,500 to like 1,100. So Bill and I are constantly working on which of these, especially Spectrum, can we get a long-term contract with so that we're then have a lower rate. So these will show up even after my fancy dancy meeting going through contracts because something just happened. We don't have a contract. We want to approve the use of Medicaid with that. Or if we don't approve these contracts, then the cost gets put to the actual consumer. So Spectrum will say, all right, you guys didn't approve it. I guess we have to charge the family. Well, they have a benefit. So these are retrospective, and I don't like that. So the least we can do that, the better. You bring them before and have a long-term contract, but these are kind of reactionary of things that happened. So that's what those are. And then the last one, I'll just tell you what we're doing. As part of our electronic medical record implementation, we're contracting with DECO that has a staff person, but believe it or not, that used to work here, that knows our current system really well. In fact, she wrote a lot of the programming. Well, she doesn't work here anymore. So what we want to do is have her under contract to be part of our implementation team. So when we're trying to answer questions like, how does our old system translate to our new system? We have somebody that was worked here long enough to go, I wrote that code, here's what it is. My current staff are kind of like, we kind of know, but it's like a copy of a copy. So we're fortunate enough to have this person still in the area that's like, yeah, I'll be under contract, come in and help with your implementation. So that contract is to help with the consultation fee through a staffing organization who will ensure that they have the appropriate amount of assurance and everything else we need for contracts instead of her having to doing it independently. So that's what that is to help with the implementation of our new electronic medical record with the previous employee under contract with this group to help us implement it smoothly. And I know our IT department was very happy with this opportunity and it'll allow us to have a better transition from data from the old system to the new. And we're anticipating it's not going to be that expensive, even though this might be expensive, you know, it's usually at $88 an hour. Usually consultation contracts like that are triple that.
Mhm.
So this person is saying, yes, I'm helping. This is what I'm willing to do it for. But IT consultation contracts at this round are usually 3 times as much. Now, I just said that in public and now I just screwed it because she'll go back and ask, but that's what this is. And we're very lucky to have it as an option.
Questions?
Yeah,
Mr.
just a follow-up question into Spectrum Health, make sure I didn't miss this. With this single case agreement, are these contracts being applied prospectively or are we ratifying what we've already done?
The latter, ratifying what we've already done.
Okay.
It's one of those things where I have to approve the admission and if we don't have a contract with them and we don't approve this, cost gets moved to the client. And so I want to try to avoid this as much as possible in the future, but they do happen.
Well, and I want to acknowledge the contract with the DECO because speed of adaptation is always a concern with, when we're transitioning electronic health records. And we are very fortunate to have an expert in the community that can help out that way. Because it's a super stressful time for, the team that uses the EHR, because even for the expert, it slows down your productivity. So I feel like we're very, very fortunate to have this person at a low rate. And then I also have to thank you for the risk category in your chart. I'm trying to flip to it as far as so that you provided to the board, the financial risk threshold for us, and then the estimated annual utilization is very, very helpful when we're approving contracts. They have financial consideration to them. So thank you for that.
I too wanted to say that. I know it took extra work and time, but
Yep.
I know we're data geeks, but it matters. Like the numbers matter. I want to know how many people we're serving. And so I know it took extra time, but thank you for doing that, Bill and everybody. Yeah, thank you, Bill, for the extra time and effort. It's very helpful.
All right. Anything else? So the motion is to approve the new October 2024 service contracts as presented. Can I have a roll call vote?
Mr. Parnon? Ms. Wenzel?
Yes.
Swick?
Yes.
Ms. Bunce?
Yes.
Mr. Byrd?
Yes.
Mr. Rockman?
Yes.
Ms. Van Hoven?
Yes.
Mr. Savage?
Yes.
Rhodey?
Yes.
Ms. Kleinens?
Yes.
Mr. Klein, I'm sorry. Ms. Cosby?
Yes.
Happy? Passed.
Motion passes. All right, now we're on to agenda item 10, general information, comments, and meetings attended. I don't know if you would like to read this, Mr. Rockman?
Yeah, I'll follow up on this. Yesterday I had given my notice of resignation to Gretchen. And to dispel any mystery, I guess I could just read it.
Yeah, if you're comfortable with that.
Yeah, I'm fine with that, just so there's no secret about what I sent. I'd sent, Dear Chair, please accept this notice of my resignation, CMH Board effective November 1. And I did not make this decision lightly. The recent loss of my beloved wife has caused me to reassess the course of my life's journey. I feel blessed to have had the opportunity to serve the community on this board. And I also miss Kira coming to these meetings to make public comment, usually right after Rosalie. I can leave knowing that CMH is in good hands under leadership of Dr. Bashir's and the governance of this board. And I've had the opportunity to watch this board grow in a very collegial body, engaged in very thoughtful discussions about how to best serve the most vulnerable in our community. And so I pray for your continued success. In parting, I add, quoting from Romans, and we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose. So again, I just want to thank everybody for the opportunity to participate in the service to our community. That's
Thank
it.
you. I would like to say how fortunate I feel that we have been, that you have come to this board and worked so diligently for the last year, both as a father to Sam, and I think you're fulfilling kind of a wish I had the great fortune of knowing Kira briefly, but a wish from her to continue to advocate for your son. And you do a tremendous job at it. You have a unique set of professional skills that you've brought to this board, both as an attorney and your eye on the contracts, but also as a clinical pharmacist, or you're actually a retail pharmacist, if I remember correctly. Yes, so I thank you so much, because it's not a paid role. And it's really a commitment to service to your community. So thank you, Stephen.
Welcome.
Thank you, Steve.
Oh.
I just want to say, Steve and I have learned so much from you for this past year, and most of you don't know this, but I get to see Sam practically every day at Compassionate Heart, and I just want to encourage you, you are doing amazing. And for us who sit here as parents, I can't imagine that responsibility if I had to do Jacob all alone. I don't think I could do that. And hearing the stories of Sam when Kara was still living and what I had pictured Sam, and I just told you the other day, he's doing so good. And that's you. So thank you so much for what you're doing to come around him and to do this brave step to be there for Sam. I admire you for doing that. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you for being there. Sam's really enjoying Compassionate Hearts, and he's kind of becoming the center of attention doing his dance routine.
I love his hat. I love his hat. It's his trademark, but I just want to encourage you that you're doing a remarkable job by yourself.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. All right, next on our agenda is public comment. If you do have a public comment, come to the podium. You have 3 minutes to speak. Please introduce yourself and share with the board where you vote. Hello.
By way of backdrop, because I know some of you may not be familiar with the service we offer, we provide 24/7 residential services, considered specialized residential, to 32 men and women, half of whom come from Ottawa County. And just to give you a little bit of a picture, we are often serving what has autism. Not everybody, by any means. But what that means is we're serving individuals who need full care, often have really complex behavioral profiles, and often are not traditionally verbal. So we have the joy and responsibility of serving individuals with very intensive support needs. So Dr. Bashirs was sharing extensively about how millage funding has benefited organizations like Ben's Hope and many others. I want to thank you. It's been critically important to us as we've, it's called stabilization. Continue to provide services to the people that serve, and it has done that for us. But I also think it's valuable to give you a picture of just what the impact of the loss of millage funding will mean for an organization like that. So I'm going to show you a chart that I hope it's the most simple chart that I hope you'll be able to see, and we can pass it around if you like.
We could add that to our packet as well. Yeah.
So essentially what I want to show you is what our Medicaid rate has looked like since 2021 and what's contributed to that trend. I also want to show you what our expense line has looked like. And I want to show you where millage funding has really, that's the gap. So what you're going to see, this blue line represents what's happened since 2021. The increase in our Medicaid rates just for our Ottawa folks. Now you'll notice that there's a little upward trajectory in that. That is because we've added some people and also because there have been in some cases a change in medical condition, meaning that their rate has become a little bit higher, and also because we've had a direct care worker pass through. So quite honestly, if we hadn't had those anomalies, that line would pretty much look flat. Now what you see in the gray line is the upward trajectory. And I want you to notice the orange line. This is the gap that millage funding has helped address. It by no means got us to covering the cost of care, but it really was a significant and essential help. What you'll notice when that millage funding drops off in 2026 is an enormous gap that represents a fundraising need of of a little bit over $800,000 just for our Ottawa folks. Kent County follows your funding. So they go with the same rates Ottawa decides. which then represents more than 50% of the people. And that is, when we read things in the news like CMHOC closing, this is the critical thing that providers are facing. And so I thank you so much for your work to understand how that needs to translate into, because here's what I want to do, and I've shared this here before. Right now we're raising well over $1 million to address that gap that exists for all of our counties. If we don't have to use it for the Medicaid services that you contract with us to provide, we want to provide housing that will serve people who are mild to moderate, exactly what you were talking about. We want to innovate, but right now we're using those fundraised dollars to provide the
Had some drama to what you're
Oh, the
saying.
draws. It's gone with the wind. No.
So thank you for letting me share that with you. I also want to say this, and I love Ottawa County. This is our home. If we didn't have the millage funding, the rates we're receiving from Ottawa County are lower than any of the other 5 counties that we're serving. So as we
Wow.
think about opening these 2 new homes, that will be 12 spots for people that urgently need this, my board, and I respect them for this, is that you cannot consider serving individuals who are going to come and sit out of the house.
Oh.
I want these spots to be open to the community. And it has to be.
And that is not uncommon, Krista, even like in the adult living circumstances as well. We can only take so many people who would have straight Medicaid reimbursement or Medicare reimbursement, sorry, yeah.
Like us, everybody is.
Right.
Everyone is.
Right, right.
And so I think our thought towards sustainability 5, 10, 15 years out has to look at, can we afford to serve individuals who come in underfunded? And we're doing it right now. And because we've got such a generous community, we're able to make it work. But I'd be naive to think that it's going to work forever.
I'm sorry that this has happened, but I'm really excited that it's, the gap has been identified and there's a strategy in place, or we're starting to build a strategy.
Strategy, and I think it will be a strategy that serves the entire region. And I'm very, very grateful to the work that was led by Lynn Doyle over the
Oh, yes,
to
yeah.
recognize this. So I just want to I want to honor that work as well and recognize that we do.
No. I mean, nothing disparaging that way. It's just, yeah, with the millage, we had no idea that you could be potentially creating a gap there. So, yeah, everybody well intended. So, thank you. Are there any other public comments? Well, again, this has been a very valuable board meeting, Community Mental Health Board meeting, and I thank you, everybody, for your contribution. And our board meeting is adjourned.